It was just before dawn when a strange email arrived in Ethan's inbox. The subject line was simple but ominous. New roof equipment. Wi-Fi repeaters installed. At first, he thought it was spam. But when he read the name of the HOA president at the bottom, his heart skipped a beat. The message claimed that the HOA had installed Wi-Fi repeaters on his roof for community-wide internet improvement. He stared at the screen, blinking in disbelief. The email ended with a polite note, offering no explanation, no apology, and certainly no permission. His blood ran cold. Ethan had always prided himself on being a responsible homeowner. He followed the rules, paid his dues, and maintained his property. Yet now someone, without his consent, had taken it upon themselves to use his roof. He stood up from his desk, his fingers tingling with frustration, and rushed outside in his pajamas. The cold morning air hit him like a slap, but he barely felt it as he looked up at the roof of his two-story house. There they were, big, bulky Wi-Fi repeaters mounted on his roof, their white plastic frames glaring in the first light of the day. A small red LED blinked on each of them, silently mocking him. Ethan's gut churned with rage as he took a few steps back and stared up, trying to make sense of the situation. These weren't just random devices. This was an invasion. He had always been a private person, and the idea that his property was being used to provide free internet access to others without his knowledge felt like a direct violation of that privacy. He couldn't fathom how the HOA had gotten away with this. Who gave them the right to use his roof? More importantly, who gave them the right to use his internet connection? His heart pounded as he fumbled with his phone, dialing the HOA's number. The call went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, he hung up and called again, this time demanding answers. Still, no one picked up. The sense of powerlessness was overwhelming. For a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the repeaters as if they might somehow answer his questions. But they didn't. Instead, he could feel the creeping anxiety knotting his stomach. He paced back and forth along the driveway, racking his brain for an explanation. Surely there had to be a mistake. Maybe they had confused his address with someone else's. Maybe they hadn't meant to install them here. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the case. This was deliberate. The HOA had made a decision, and it was now taking place on his roof, with no warning or permission. This was no simple miscommunication. This was an outright breach. The HOA had power. They controlled the community's rules, regulated everything from lawn care to house paint colors, and now they had taken control of his internet. His mind raced as he tried to think of what to do next. What were his options? Who could he even turn to? He needed more information. He needed to know exactly what was going on, what rights he had, and how far this overreach stretched. As the sun slowly rose, Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. It wasn't just about the Wi-Fi. It was about control, his control over his property, his privacy. This wasn't just a nuisance. This was a battle, and Ethan had no intention of losing it. He turned back toward the house, his resolve hardening. Something had to be done, and he was going to make sure the HOA paid for every single byte they stole from him. But little did he know, the battle had only just begun. Ethan's heart raced as he stepped back inside, slamming the door behind him. His breath came in short bursts, his mind spinning. The email, the Wi-Fi repeaters, the utter audacity of it all. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger. He grabbed his laptop, determined to find out just how far this HOA had gone. The email hadn't said much, but the more he thought about it, the more pieces began to fall into place. He pulled up the HOA's official website, scanning through the usual boring updates and rules. But buried in the latest community bulletin was a single cryptic line. Community Wi-Fi initiative launched. It seemed innocuous enough, until Ethan realized what it actually meant. They were rolling out free Wi-Fi across the entire neighborhood. Free Wi-Fi, powered by his roof. The anger flared up again, hotter now. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. These repeaters weren't just some tech experiment. This was intentional. They'd used his home as a hub for a new network, funneling bandwidth straight from his internet connection to dozens, if not hundreds of neighbors. It dawned on him. This wasn't just about convenience for the community. It was about cost saving. By using his personal internet connection, they were avoiding the massive expense of setting up their own infrastructure, and they were doing it without so much as a "buy your leave." Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard as he opened up his router's admin panel. His blood ran cold when he saw the usage stats. His data usage had spiked dramatically in the last 24 hours. Many people were tapping into his network. He could see multiple devices logged in, computers, phones, even smart TVs, all pinging in from various directions. He felt violated, exposed. It wasn't just his roof. Now his private connection was being exploited. He clicked through to his ASP's account page, eyes narrowing. The amount of bandwidth being consumed by the HOA's repeaters was already starting to rack up. He knew exactly how much data each repeater could transmit, and the numbers didn't lie. Each byte being used on his connection was costing him money, and the HOA wasn't paying a dime. But that wasn't even the worst part. Ethan realized the full scope of the breach. They weren't just using his internet. They were using his property as a launchpad for their entire scheme. He had no control over who was accessing his network. He had no idea who these people were or what they were doing on his connection. The thought made his skin crawl. What if they were monitoring his traffic? What if they were stealing his data, accessing private files, or worse, tracking his every move? Ethan's pulse quickened, but then he caught himself. He couldn't let panic dictate his next move. He needed evidence, something concrete to hold against them. The HOA wouldn't take him seriously unless he could prove that their actions had consequences. It was time to dig deeper. With renewed focus, he ran a series of tests, gathering data on the repeaters' IP addresses, tracking their traffic. Hours passed, and the more he uncovered, the more horrifying the picture became. This wasn't just some innocent community improvement. It was a financial scheme, a privacy violation, a network built on the back of his personal resources. He pulled out his phone and dialed the HOA again, his fingers trembling. He needed to confront them, to demand answers. But this time, the line rang longer, unanswered. That silence only made the storm building inside him grow fiercer. Ethan hung up, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had been pushed too far. And now, the HOA had no idea what was coming their way. But even as he began to formulate his next move, a creeping thought lingered at the back of his mind. What if this wasn't just happening to him? What if every homeowner in the neighborhood was being used the same way? A chilling realization hit him. This wasn't just an invasion of his home. This was the HOA's silent war on the entire neighborhood, and Ethan was about to become their fiercest opponent. With one final glance at the screen, he knew it was time to take action, and he wasn't going to back down until every byte of data was accounted for. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA's intrusion wasn't just a careless mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated move. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The HOA was leveraging his property for financial gain, all while keeping the entire neighborhood in the dark. They had used his internet connection as a cheap, hidden resource, avoiding the costs of setting up their own network by stealing bandwidth from him. But he wasn't about to let this slide. With a determined look, Ethan spent the next few days meticulously collecting evidence, running diagnostics on the network, and calculating exactly how much data was being siphoned off. Each test revealed more disturbing details. The repeaters weren't just boosting the signal. They were routing data through his home network, and he could see the traffic flowing. Hundreds of devices logging in from all corners of the neighborhood. His internet connection had become a conduit, a silent lifeline to countless others, and he was paying the price. He sat back in his chair, the weight of it sinking in. His property, his privacy, his hard-earned money. None of it mattered to the HOA. They had quietly turned his home into a free access point for their entire Wi-Fi network. Ethan was no longer just a homeowner. He was a pawn in their game. A sharp, gnawing thought began to form in his mind. What if they're doing this to everyone? What if, one by one, the HOA had silently taken control of other homes, using them as hubs for their community-wide internet system? The possibility of it made his skin crawl. How far had this gone? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A message from his neighbor, Jake, popped up on the screen. It was a simple text. "Hey, do you know anything about those Wi-Fi repeaters the HOA installed on the roofs? I'm having connection issues." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He quickly typed back, "I don't think it's just you. I'm having issues too. They've been using my internet." The HOA installed those repeaters without asking. He hit send, then sat in silence, waiting for Jake's reply. The sense of isolation began to creep in, but the response he received from Jake was far worse than he expected. "That's insane. I think they're using mine too. My internet's been crazy slow for days, and my bills are spiking." Ethan's stomach twisted. He wasn't alone. There were more victims. He needed to know how widespread this scheme had become, but he couldn't just walk into the HOA office and ask questions. They'd deny everything. No, he needed something concrete, something irrefutable. A plan began to take shape in his mind. Ethan would gather more data. Real, solid evidence that could expose the HOA's hidden agenda. But he wasn't going to stop there. He needed to find a way to make them pay for every byte they'd used without permission. After all, they hadn't just stolen from him. They'd stolen from his neighbors too. That evening, he drove around the neighborhood, peeking at rooftops, counting repeaters on every house he could see. His heart sank as he counted at least 6 homes that seemed to have the same devices installed. That was just the ones he could see from the street. How many more were hidden behind trees or out of sight? How many more homes had unknowingly been turned into hotspots, feeding the HOA's network? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a long message from Jake. "I've been thinking. What if we started keeping track of this? How much data is being used? Who's using it? Maybe we can force them to pay for the damage they're causing." Ethan stared at the screen, a spark of hope flickering in his chest. Jake wasn't just worried about his slow internet. He was in this with him, ready to take action. It was a strange sense of solidarity, the first real connection to the problem he'd felt. Ethan didn't feel so alone anymore. They were in this together. And together, they were going to make the HOA pay. But even as he felt the momentum shift in his favor, a dark thought loomed at the edge of his mind. What if the HOA had anticipated this? What if they were ready for him to fight back? The suspense lingered. The battle was only beginning. And Ethan couldn't help but wonder, what kind of retaliation would the HOA unleash if he pushed too hard? The next few days were a blur of frantic planning and late-night research. Ethan's partnership with Jake deepened as they compared notes, traded theories, and worked together to gather every shred of evidence they could find. It felt like they were walking a tightrope, each step more dangerous than the last. As the weight of the situation pressed on him, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA wasn't just a faceless entity. It was a force, an invisible power with connections and resources that could easily crush them if they pushed too hard. And yet, retreating wasn't an option anymore. Ethan had already started cataloging the data usage from his router, monitoring the spikes in bandwidth every time a neighbor connected. The numbers were staggering. He knew it wouldn't take long before the HOA noticed the unusual activity. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear. They were keeping their distance, playing it cool, waiting for him to make a move, and Ethan was about to make his. But as his plan to confront the HOA and demand compensation began to take shape, something strange happened. The quiet, creeping tension in the air thickened. Ethan's internet speed began to fluctuate, not just in the usual pattern of high traffic times, but at random intervals throughout the day. His connection dropped entirely several times, leaving him staring at the screen in frustration. His first instinct was to check the network usage, but when he did, he found something far worse than a slowdown. There, buried in the data logs, was an unfamiliar IP address, one that didn't belong to any of his neighbors. It wasn't a random device or a neighbor's phone. It was something deeper, something more deliberate. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His mind raced. He wasn't just dealing with a sneaky HOA anymore. Someone was monitoring his connection, and they were doing it covertly. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just a victim of data theft. He was being watched. A sense of panic began to set in. He quickly shut off his computer, then turned his attention to the router, resetting it just in case. But the sense of unease didn't dissipate. If the HOA wasn't aware of the extent of his investigation, they sure would be now. And someone with access to the HOA's network, had been keeping tabs on him. Was it a coincidence, or was it a direct threat? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was Jake. "Ethan, are you seeing this? My internet just got wiped out. It's like someone pulled the plug remotely. I'm thinking it might be the HOA. They might have caught on to us." Ethan's heart sank. He quickly dialed Jake's number. "What happened? What do you mean wiped out?" he asked, voice tight. Jake's voice came through, strained and nervous. "It's like they're cutting off access to everything. My router's gone completely dark. I can't even get to the settings page. It's as if someone's locking us out." Ethan paused, the implications hitting him. "They're watching us, Jake. Someone is tracking everything we're doing." There was a long silence on the line. Then Jake muttered, "This isn't just some oversight. They know what we're up to. And they're trying to shut us down." Ethan's mind raced. The HOA had always been a thorn in his side. But this was different. This wasn't just a bureaucratic mistake or a misunderstanding anymore. This was warfare. "You need to stay offline for a bit," Ethan said, his voice hardening. "We need to lay low and figure out how to counteract whatever they're doing." But as he ended the call, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a tech issue. The HOA had been playing the long game, covering their tracks, and now they were sending a clear message. Stop digging, or else. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at his router as if it might hold the answers. His mind was already churning through 1,000 possibilities. The HOA wasn't just trying to keep their dirty secret hidden. They were willing to go to extreme lengths to silence him. And that meant they were getting desperate. The next steps weren't going to be easy. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation crushing down on him, but he refused to back down. He had already come too far, uncovered too much, to let fear dictate his next move. But as the hours ticked by and his internet remained unstable, one question lingered, unshakable. What would the HOA do next? Ethan had the sinking feeling that they were about to find out. The next few days passed in a tense silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy and suffocating. Ethan could feel the eyes of the HOA on him. Though invisible, they were always there, lurking in the background, watching his every move. His internet connection was still spotty, fluctuating wildly at the most inconvenient times, but that was the least of his concerns. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding, something darker than just the theft of his bandwidth. It was the eerie quiet that unnerved him. They weren't coming at him full force. Not yet. Instead, they were playing a waiting game. The HOA's slow, methodical approach was designed to break him down, to wear him down until he felt powerless. But Ethan wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything he'd uncovered. It wasn't until one evening, as he sat at his desk, scrolling through his notes and data logs, that the first real warning shot came. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "I'm being watched." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had been thinking the same thing. That gut feeling. The sensation that someone, somewhere, was always one step ahead. Jake had been right. The HOA was no longer just manipulating his internet. They were actively monitoring his every move. He dialed Jake's number immediately, voice urgent. "What's going on? What do you mean you're being watched?" Jake's voice on the other end was strained. "I don't know how, but it's like someone's tracking my every click. My emails, my phone calls, even my browsing history. It's like they know what I'm researching. I swear, it's only been a matter of hours since I mentioned the HOA to you, and now, poof, everything feels off. My internet's been acting weird too. Disconnecting, reconnecting. Something's not right. Man." Ethan's heart raced. He glanced at his own phone screen. For the first time in days, he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if someone was standing right behind him. He could feel the weight of the invisible eyes on him. It wasn't just about the data now. It was about his privacy, his very identity, being ripped apart piece by piece. "I think they've got eyes on both of us," Ethan said, voice low, though he knew no one else was around to hear. "They're tracking us, Jake. We've crossed a line, and if they're watching us this closely, they're about to make their move." There was a pause before Jake's voice came through, quieter now, almost a whisper. "What are we gonna do? They've already been manipulating everything. My phone's been glitching. Even my router has been acting up. I can't even get a stable signal long enough to do research. They're trying to shut us down." Ethan's mind raced, piecing things together. They had expected him to fight back, to uncover their operation. But the HOA wasn't just stealing data anymore. They were controlling everything around him, leaving him with no escape. "I think they're using tech to track us. It's not just about Wi-Fi repeaters anymore. They've put something on our devices, on our phones, our routers. They've hacked us," Ethan said, the realization hitting like a ton of bricks. "We need to cut off their access before they tighten their grip even more." He could hear the fear in Jake's voice, but it was mixed with something else now, determination. "So, what's the plan? How do we hit back?" Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. It wasn't enough to just expose them. He had to find a way to make them pay, to get them to back off. The fight wasn't going to be won by simply confronting them head-on. No, Ethan had something far more effective in mind. "I've been looking into their finances," he said, voice steady now, full of resolve. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. I'll use the evidence we have, our internet usage, their breach of privacy, and I'll make them pay for every single byte they've stolen." Jake's voice lifted, a new edge to it. "You think they'll back down if we expose them? I'm not sure they'll take kindly to being outed." "They won't have a choice," Ethan replied, his confidence growing. "Once we present this evidence, they won't have a leg to stand on. But we need to move fast. If we wait too long, they'll get more aggressive. They'll shut us down completely." But as he ended the call, Ethan couldn't shake the ominous feeling that gnawed at him. He had no idea just how far the HOA would go to keep their operation under wraps. The more he pushed, the more dangerous things would get. But he was done being silent. He was done being their pawn. He turned his attention to his laptop, pulling up files, data logs, and the latest correspondence he'd gathered. The next phase of the plan was underway. And yet, a dark thought lingered in his mind. What if the HOA wasn't just playing a game of control? What if they had something far more sinister planned? Something they weren't ready for him to uncover? Ethan's pulse quickened as he typed, knowing that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the fight would become. But he couldn't stop now. The HOA had crossed a line, and Ethan was about to push back. Ethan sat in his dimly lit room, the glow of his laptop screen casting harsh shadows across his face. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher. The HOA wasn't just stealing his bandwidth anymore. They were in control. They had eyes on him, watching every move he made, every click he took. Jake had confirmed the worst. The HOA had breached their personal security in ways that were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Their phones were compromised. Their routers were infected with invisible malware that was keeping them on a leash that could snap at any moment. Ethan couldn't afford to stay in the dark any longer. He needed to act before they struck back, harder than before. With shaky hands, Ethan pulled up the data logs he had been meticulously collecting over the past few days. He stared at the numbers, the patterns emerging clearer by the minute. The repeaters scattered across the neighborhood were just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, there was a deep, tangled web of surveillance and manipulation. The HOA had embedded their tech so deeply into the community's infrastructure that it would be impossible to unravel it without them noticing. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had the evidence. He had everything he needed to expose them. But the real question was, what would the HOA do once they realized someone had caught on? His phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jake. "We need to meet. They've escalated." Ethan's stomach dropped. He quickly typed back. "Where?" The reply came swiftly. "Same place as last time. But be careful. I don't think we're the only ones watching anymore." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had suspected it, but hearing it from Jake confirmed it. They weren't just being monitored by the HOA. They were being hunted. He quickly grabbed his jacket, threw his phone in his pocket, and left his apartment. His mind raced as he walked the familiar streets toward their meeting spot, a small, quiet park on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The sun had begun to dip behind the trees, casting the world in a pale orange glow. But the beauty of the evening didn't ease the tight knot in his chest. Every car that passed seemed to loom too long. Every shadow seemed to move a little too quickly. When he arrived, Jake was already there, sitting on a bench under the flickering streetlight. Ethan could see the unease on his face, the same look he was sure was on his own. "You're right. They know," Jake said, his voice low. "I've been seeing strange things, little glitches. My phone's been buzzing, almost like it's receiving signals from somewhere nearby. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not just about data anymore. It's about control." Ethan nodded, his stomach tightening. The thought echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. It's not just data, it's control. "Have you noticed anything else strange?" Ethan asked, scanning the area for any sign of surveillance. The park was empty, but the paranoia was creeping in. "Yeah," Jake replied, glancing around nervously. "Yesterday, I got a weird email from someone I don't know. It looked like it came from the HOA, but it had some strange attachments. When I clicked on them," he hesitated, shuddering. "My entire computer froze. I thought it was a virus at first, but now I'm thinking it was something else, something they planted to track me." Ethan's mind raced. The HOA wasn't just manipulating their internet and devices. They were going so far as to control the very tools they were using to fight back. It was becoming clear. This wasn't just a small-time scam anymore. They were dealing with an organized, covered operation, one with far-reaching consequences. "We need to move fast," Ethan said, determination creeping into his voice. "I've got everything we need to expose them. But now, it's not just about making them pay for stealing our bandwidth. We need to find out what they're really after. What's the endgame here?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "You don't think they've already planned for us to expose them, do you?" Ethan's stomach tightened. He hadn't considered that, but the thought was chilling. The HOA was far more sophisticated than they'd given them credit for. They weren't just stealing from homeowners. They were building something bigger. And now, they were willing to go to any length to protect their secret. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from an unknown number. His fingers trembled as he opened it, but the words were simple and unmistakable. "Stop digging, or we'll make sure you never get the chance to expose us." The air felt suddenly cold. Ethan's heart raced as he stared at the screen, the message burning into his mind. This wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. The HOA had escalated. And now, Ethan and Jake were standing at the precipice of a battle they might not survive. "They're watching us now," Ethan whispered, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next." But as he looked into Jake's eyes, the same determination mirrored in both of them. Ethan realized one undeniable truth. This fight had just become life or death. Ethan stood in the cold, his phone still clutched in his hand. The chilling message burned into his mind. "Stop digging, or we'll make sure you never get the chance to expose us." The words seemed to echo in his head, and for a moment, he felt a wave of doubt flood over him. This was no longer just a fight for justice or exposure. It was a battle for survival. Jake was staring at him, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "This is it, Ethan. They've crossed the line. We've got to shut them down before they shut us out. Permanently." Ethan nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a heavy stone. But his resolve didn't falter. He had come too far to back down now. This wasn't just about protecting his home anymore. It was about stopping the HOA from using their power to control every aspect of his life and the lives of everyone around him. "We have to go on the offensive," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I've got the evidence. We expose them in public. The more people who know, the harder it'll be for them to cover it up. But we have to move fast. If we wait too long, they'll shut us down, or worse." Jake's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and resolve. What if they've already got someone in the press, ready to spin this into something else? What if they're controlling the narrative? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He had considered that too. The HOA was powerful, but they couldn't control everything. Not if they went public with their findings, not if they made sure the truth reached the right people. But the fear was real. The fear that once they exposed the truth, the HOA would retaliate harder than they ever had before. Suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed again. His pulse quickened. It was an email this time, from the same unknown address that had sent the threatening text earlier. This time, the subject line read, "You don't know who you're messing with." He opened it cautiously, his hand steady despite the rising tide of adrenaline. The email was simple, just a few lines of text, but the words were enough to freeze his blood. "You've been warned. Keep going, and we'll make sure you regret it. You'll be lucky if your life is the only thing we ruin." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the danger now, right at the edge of everything. These weren't empty threats. The HOA had crossed a line, and they weren't going to stop until they had silenced him for good. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. They weren't just trying to protect their network. They were willing to destroy anyone who threatened it. "We have to do it now," Ethan said, his voice low, firm. "We have to expose them before they can retaliate. No more waiting. No more second guessing. If we don't move fast, they'll make sure we never get the chance." Jake swallowed hard, but there was no hesitation in his voice when he replied, "I'm in, whatever it takes." Ethan set to work immediately, contacting the few trusted reporters he had managed to get in touch with over the past few days. He knew that going public was risky, but it was the only chance they had to take control of the situation. He sent everything. The evidence, the emails, the data logs, every detail that painted the HOA as the corrupt, invasive entity it truly was. He even reached out to a few lawyers who had experience with cybercrime and privacy violations. The plan was set in motion, but as Ethan hit send on the last message, a deep unease settled in his gut. They were already making their move. He could feel it. It was only a matter of time before the HOA struck back, and when they did, it would be brutal. But there was no turning back now. They had exposed the HOA's operation. The fight had become public, and Ethan could feel the tension building with every passing minute, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Then, as if to confirm his fears, his phone buzzed again. A new message, this one from his neighbor, Jake. "They know. I just got a strange knock on my door. Someone's here. Ethan's blood ran cold. The HOA wasn't just watching them. They were closing in. This wasn't just about stealing bandwidth anymore. They had escalated. The moment they went public, they had made themselves the target. And now the HOA was closing in with the force of a storm, ready to sweep them away. Ethan's heart raced. Jake, don't let them in. Whatever you do, don't talk to them. Get to a safe place. I'm coming to you right now. But even as he spoke the words, he could already hear the sound of footsteps behind him. Too close, too heavy. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone anymore. You should have stopped. A voice whispered from the shadows, sending a shiver down his spine. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was happening. The fight had just become a matter of life and death. Ethan didn't turn around right away. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his mind knew better. The voice behind him, low, cold, emotionless, belonged to someone who didn't bluff. Someone who had been watching, waiting for this exact moment. Keep walking, the voice said. Act normal. Don't try anything stupid. Ethan complied. His heart thundered in his chest as he moved toward the corner of the park, eyes scanning for an escape, a camera, a witness, anything. The chill in the evening air felt suffocating now. He subtly tapped the side button on his phone 3 times, activating the emergency recording function. If he didn't make it out of here, someone needed to know what happened. You should have stayed quiet, the voice hissed. Now it's too late for you and your friend. Jake. Ethan's blood ran cold. What did you do to him? The voice didn't answer, but then a car engine growled in the distance. Tires screeched. A horn blared. Ethan spun. The man behind him, tall, wearing a black hoodie, face shadowed, reached for something in his coat. Ethan didn't wait. He ran. He bolted toward the street, heart hammering, feet pounding against the pavement. Behind him, the man shouted something and gave chase. Ethan cut across a backyard, hurdled a short fence, and darted down a side alley. He didn't stop until he burst into the front yard of Jake's house, only to find the front door wide open. Jake, Ethan gasped, rushing inside. The house was dark, silent. His voice echoed down the hall, unanswered. Then a voice called out, hoarse but alive. Back here. Ethan sprinted toward it and found Jake in the living room, disheveled but unharmed, crouched over a laptop. I knew they'd come, Jake said, eyes wild. They tried to grab me. Some guy knocked, said he was a city inspector, but I saw the earpiece. I slipped out the back and looped around. Thought I'd have a few minutes to kill access points. You okay? Ethan asked, panting. Barely. But look, this is it. I found their data stream. On the screen, lines of code and IP logs scroll like an unraveling web. Ethan stared in awe. Jake had cracked into the HOA's command server, an off-site relay rerouting traffic from every repeater on every roof. This proves everything, Jake said. They weren't just stealing bandwidth. They were profiling the entire neighborhood, habits, smart device data, even security camera feeds. They're selling it, Ethan whispered, to marketers, maybe worse. Together, they executed the final step. Encrypt the entire archive, watermark it with their digital signature, and release it to 3 sources at once: tech journalists, a cybersecurity watchdog, and a popular streamer known for exposing shady corporations. It was live in under 2 minutes. Moments later, both of their phones lit up like Christmas trees. Tweets, DMs, articles. The story had gone viral. HOA spy network exposed. Residents used as data farms. The retaliation never came. With public scrutiny blazing like wildfire, the HOA retreated, their secrets torn into the light. Weeks later, Ethan received a settlement offer, quiet, off the record, a 5-figure sum to stay silent. He declined. Instead, he smiled and wrote one final message back. You put repeaters on my roof without asking. Now the world knows what every byte cost you. And hit send.